Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive. And today we're going to be exploring Bushido, the Code of the Samurai. We're going to be going beyond, your typical warrior stereotypes, and we're going to be using Inazo Nitobe's Bushido, the soul of Japan, to kind of look and see what's surprisingly relevant in our modern world.
Yeah, I think it's really fascinating that this book actually wasn't intended as a samurai how-to manual. Neo was really trying to explain these values to Westerners back in the, early 1900s.
Oh, interesting. So it was more like an insider's perspective for outsiders.
Yeah.
But even though it wasn't a rule book, like you said, Bushido impacted a lot more than just warfare, right?
Uh,
It influenced art, politics, and daily life. I mean, did everyday people in Japan actually live by these ideals?
I think it's better to think of it less as strict adherence and more as a cultural undercurrent that was, shaping how people viewed the world. It's kind of hard to separate Bushido from Japanese society during that
Yeah.
time, especially, the feudal period.
Okay, so let's dive into some of the principles. One that really stood out to me was rectitude, this unwavering commitment to doing what's right, even when facing death. Um, Nitobe compares it to the bones in our body, like providing structure.
Yeah.
And he says, without it, talent and skill mean nothing.
It's such a powerful analogy, and I think the reason why it's so powerful is because it resonates even today.
Right.
It begs the question, what are your non-negotiables? Those principles that really give you a backbone even when things get tough?
Yeah,
That's really what rectitude was all about.
that's a really good point. But then there's Giri, right?
Yeah.
Which initially was like right reason, but then it kind of evolved into duty imposed by society.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering if that could clash with rectitude. Like, what if society expects something that you personally believe is wrong?
Yeah, that's where it gets a little tricky.
Yeah.
Because Geary could be twisted to justify acts that weren't really moral, acts that were really more driven by fear of judgment rather than a true moral compass. Imagine living in a society where honor is paramount, but doing the quote-unquote right thing might cost you everything.
Yeah. I mean, wow, talk about a dilemma. Makes you
Yeah.
think about where we draw the line between duty and, our own personal conviction.
Right.
Now, of course, we can't talk about Bushido without talking about courage.
Of course, yeah.
But it wasn't just about, like, charging into battle.
Right.
It wasn't just physical bravery. I mean, they definitely trained for that. Cowardice was, like, the ultimate shame. There's that story about a captured samurai who refused food because he thought that feeling hunger when your stomach was empty was disgraceful.
Oh, wow.
Hardcore.
Yeah, yeah. It was, but they took it a step further. The higher form of valor was really mental composure. Think about Utadokan. He was a warrior and a poet, and he was attacked, and fatally wounded. And instead of panicking, he calmly composed a death poem about the fleeting nature of life.
Wow. Talk about going out with style.
Right.
I mean, that level of composure, it just makes you wonder how we can tap into that inner stillness in our own battles. You know what I mean?
Absolutely, yeah.
And then it's interesting because Bushido also valued benevolence,
Yes.
which seems kind of counterintuitive, in a warrior culture.
Yeah.
But showing mercy, especially to a defeated enemy, was seen as true strength.
Yeah, and you see that demonstrated in this anecdote about this warrior who spared a younger opponent in battle, but he regretted it so much that he actually ended up becoming a monk.
Wow.
It makes you think, sometimes true compassion means making tough choices, not always being lenient.
Right.
And it really kind of points to that internal struggle within Bushido, this tension between strength and compassion, and this is really captured in that proverb. It becometh not the fowler to slay the bird which takes refuge in his bosom.
So you're talking about protecting those who seek your help, regardless of circumstance.
Yes.
I mean, it's like the foundation of modern humanitarian movements. Right?
Yeah.
That universal compassion.
Absolutely. Now let's move on to politeness.
Okay.
In Bushido, it was a sign of self-mastery and not just, good manners. It was about achieving harmony, or bienseance, which is achieving harmony within oneself and with your surroundings.
Gotcha. And the Japanese tea ceremony, cha no yu, is a perfect example of that. All those rituals and that precision,
Yeah.
that calmness and simplicity. It's really all about reflecting that deeper inner discipline.
It's not just about serving tea. It's about cultivating mindfulness and respect.
Right. Speaking of respect, Nitobe has this really funny, or I guess he calls it awfully funny, example of a Japanese person standing in the sun.
Oh, yeah.
But they're keeping their parasol down while you're talking to them. And it's their way of saying, I'm sharing your discomfort.
Exactly, yeah. It's a subtle gesture, but it really embodies how politeness in Bushido went beyond words. It was about demonstrating empathy and consideration in every action. It kind of makes you wonder if we've lost some of that nuanced consideration in our fast-paced world.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. Absolutely. And that kind of leads us to how truthfulness might clash with this emphasis on politeness. Can you maybe elaborate on that a little?
Sure. So in Japanese, falsehood, or yuso, has a wider meaning than it does in English. It encompasses anything that's not truth or fact. So, for example, saying, I'm fine, when you're actually feeling awful, wouldn't necessarily be considered a lie.
Right, right. But Bushido wouldn't condone lying just to be polite, right?
Right.
That would just
Yeah.
be an empty form. It would lack sincerity.
Exactly. Although Nitobe does bring up this historical issue of looser business ethics in Japan, particularly when it came to dealing with outsiders.
Oh,
And he suggests it was because commerce was viewed as a lower ranking profession than being a warrior.
okay.
So perhaps, merchants weren't necessarily held to the same strict moral code as the samurai.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
It really makes you think about modern situations where honesty and politeness might clash, right?
Mhm.
Have you ever struggled with balancing those
Oh, of
two?
course, yeah. All the time.
Yeah,
It's,
yeah,
a fine line sometimes.
yeah. Of course, we can't talk about Bushido without talking about honor.
Right.
I mean, it was paramount.
Oh,
Often it was valued above life itself. And shame was really used as a powerful tool to guide behavior from childhood.
absolutely. Kids were constantly reminded about, what brought honor or shame to their family name.
Yeah.
It's hard to imagine growing up with that kind of pressure.
Yeah, it is.
There's this really intense story. It's about Mishizane. He was exiled due to false accusations, and his enemies wanted to completely wipe out his family. So they were targeting his young son, and a loyal retainer hid the boy. And when he was ordered to deliver the child's head, he found a substitute. Another retainer's son was willing to sacrifice himself along with his mother
Oh my
to
gosh.
protect this boy. It's really an extreme example of how deeply ingrained honor and loyalty were in samurai culture. It really challenges our modern sensibilities, but I think it forces us to confront how much we let public perception dictate our own actions even today. Is it reputation or is it something deeper?
Yeah, it definitely makes you think. And from honor, we naturally move to loyalty, right?
Yes.
Another pillar of Bushido. And this one often surpassed even family ties.
Absolutely, and Nitobe describes it beautifully. He says, tiny pebbles grow into mighty rocks draped with moss. He's illustrating how loyalty in Japanese culture slowly strengthens over time.
That's beautiful. But wasn't it more than just blind obedience? Like a true samurai would advise their lord if they disagreed with them, even if
Yeah.
it put them at risk. Right?
Exactly. And Nitobe even tells the story of Shigemori, who was torn between loyalty to his father who was rebelling and his lord. And he was so conflicted that he prayed for death to avoid having to make that decision.
Wow.
So you can see how it was.
That's heavy.
Yeah, it raises some tough questions for us today. Where's the line between loyalty and questioning authority? When is it okay to disagree with those we're loyal to?
Right, yeah. Speaking of loyalty and training, it's interesting to note that samurai training went beyond just swordsmanship, right?
Right.
I mean, they trained in swordsmanship, archery, horsemanship, jujitsu.
Mm.
But what else?
Well, surprisingly, math wasn't really emphasized. It wasn't as crucial in feudal warfare as it would become, later on. Battles weren't really planned with that same strategic precision as in later periods.
So what was the focus then, besides the fighting?
Well, they really prioritized mental and moral training. Literature, ethics, deep reverence for their teachers who acted as mentors and guides. They weren't just trying to create skilled warriors, they were aiming to create well-rounded individuals.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. It's a much more holistic approach to education than, we often see today.
Yeah.
I think we could learn a lot from that. Training the mind along with the body.
Absolutely, yeah.
And speaking of training the mind, Bushido really emphasized self-control, particularly emotional control. A true samurai wouldn't openly display joy or grief.
Right, right. And Nitobe actually describes a regiment leaving for war, and the farewell was completely silent. And he contrasts this with the more, emotional Western farewells.
It almost seems cold, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
But it was more about maintaining inner strength, right?
Yeah, it was about not letting emotions cloud judgment or, distract from duty.
It makes you think about how we handle emotions today.
Yeah.
I mean, are we ever pressured to hide our true feelings.
Mm.
Are there times when, we're expected to just be stoic, even when we're hurting inside?
Yeah, definitely. Um, and now we need to address a topic that's pretty sensitive, but we need to approach it with historical understanding. And that's the practices of suicide and redress.
Seppuku, ritual suicide, and Katakeuchi, revenge killing. Definitely not practices we endorse today,
Right.
but they were deeply entwined with that Bushido code of honor.
Absolutely. And it's crucial to remember that seppuku wasn't always, you know, about despair. It could also be atonement for a crime or a way to avoid capture and disgrace or even a way to prove your sincerity. It was always a ritual and it emphasized self-control even in death.
It's kind of hard to wrap your head around that.
Yeah.
And then there's Katakeuchi, right?
Yeah.
Which was seen as necessary in a society that didn't have a formal justice system.
Right.
So if someone wronged you or your family revenge was expected,
Right. Which obviously led to cycles of violence and feuds that span generations. So you can see how these practices are really outdated, but they do highlight the extreme value that Bushido placed on honor and responsibility.
it reminds us that the desire for justice and retribution is very much ingrained in human nature, even if we express it differently today.
Exactly.
And let's not forget the symbolic importance of the sword in Bushido.
Yeah.
More than just a weapon, it represented the samurai soul.
Yeah, it did. And boys started with wooden swords and progressed to real ones as they matured. And this was done very intentionally to instill respect for the power and the responsibility of wielding a sword.
And they even named their swords.
Yeah.
It suggests a deeper, almost a spiritual connection than simply having a weapon.
Exactly, exactly. Bushido recognized this dual nature of the sword. It's a tool for protection, but it's also a temptation for misuse. And Nitobe actually shares the story of Count Katsu. He was a powerful figure who lived through really turbulent times, but he never killed anyone despite having countless opportunities.
Well,
He believed that true strength actually lay in restraint, knowing when not to use violence. I think it's a powerful lesson for us even today.
it is. And finally, let's address the often misunderstood role of women in Bushido.
Right. There's this misconception about women being entirely subservient, but that's not really the whole picture. Bushido had a very specific view of femininity: strength, loyalty, and self-sacrifice, often exceeding what was expected of men.
So they were expected to be skilled in martial arts and domestic duties, raising strong sons and managing the household while their husbands were away at war.
Exactly. And their honor and chastity were paramount, sometimes even to the point of suicide if they were threatened. Nitobe actually includes this really poignant poem about a captive woman who drowns herself to protect her honor. It shows that within this seemingly rigid social structure, women still found ways to exercise agency and really embody those Bushido values in their own way.
It's remarkable. And that brings us to Bushido's enduring influence.
Yeah.
Even though the samurai class was abolished, its values still shape Japan today. It's a fascinating paradox.
It is.
Yeah, it's not like people are consciously thinking like, what would a samurai do? But those values have just seeped into the collective consciousness, shaping everything from social interactions to work ethic to artistic expression. But how does this ancient code fit into a modern democratic society? Stay tuned for part 2, where we'll delve a little deeper into that question. Welcome back. We left off talking about how an ancient warrior code like Bushido fits into our modern democratic world. It seems kind of like a paradox, like these strict hierarchical ideas in a society that values individual freedom.
It's a fascinating tension, but remember, even within Bushido itself, there were these internal conflicts and evolving interpretations. And some of these principles, if we look beneath the surface, have a surprising relevance today.
So you're saying it's not about like blindly adopting all these samurai practices.
Right.
It's more about taking that timeless wisdom and kind of adapting it to our current challenges.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Where do we even start?
Well, let's revisit rectitude for a second.
Okay.
In our age of information overload and fake news, having that inner compass, that ability to discern right from wrong and then act accordingly, even when it's difficult, is more crucial than ever.
Yeah, it's like that whole rectitude bone we were talking about, right?
Right.
Like having the guts to stand up for your beliefs, even when they're unpopular.
Exactly.
Okay.
And Deary, that sense of duty can be a little bit tricky. We don't want blind obedience to societal pressures, but recognizing our obligations to others, to our communities, to the greater good, that still has value.
So it's about finding that balance between personal integrity and social responsibility.
Right.
Like, how far do you bend to expectations before you're compromising your own
And
values?
exactly,
Yeah,
yeah. And when it comes to courage, we may not be, facing down charging armies, but we all have battles.
right.
Whether it's speaking up against injustice or overcoming personal obstacles or facing our fears, that takes a different kind of courage.
Yeah, it makes me think of Ita again, composing poetry while he was literally being killed. Okay, maybe that's a little extreme,
Right.
but it highlights the power of mental composure,
Yeah.
staying centered when everything around you is chaotic.
It's about accessing that inner stillness, that unshakable core strength that we can all tap into, whether it's, a work deadline or a difficult conversation or a personal crisis. It's a skill that we can develop just like any other skill.
The idea of benevolence in a warrior code seems a little counterintuitive at first,
Yeah,
but it makes so much sense. Showing mercy, especially to those we disagree with, feels more important now than ever.
absolutely. In a world that's becoming increasingly polarized, remembering our shared humanity is crucial. True strength isn't about dominance.
Right.
It's about that capacity for forgiveness, empathy, building bridges instead of walls.
It reminds me of that proverb, "It becometh not the fowler to slay the bird which takes refuge in his bosom."
Exactly.
It's about protecting the vulnerable, showing compassion, regardless of background or beliefs.
It goes beyond even individual acts of kindness. It's about creating a more just and equitable society where cooperation and understanding outweigh conflict.
Now, politeness might seem kind of superficial compared to some of these other ideas,
Yeah.
but Bushido views it as more than just, good manners. It was really about cultivating this deep respect for others, for their feelings, space, dignity, something I think we could all use a little more of.
Absolutely. And, remember those seemingly small gestures that Nitobe described, like standing in the sun to share discomfort or downplaying a gift, to avoid indebtedness? They reflected a deep awareness of how our actions impact other people, a commitment to harmony.
Right, so it's about putting others' needs before our own. Humility and consideration. I mean, we can practice that every day, right?
Mhm.
Whether it's listening attentively or holding a door open for someone or offering a helping hand, those small acts can really ripple outwards.
Absolutely. And now, truthfulness is a bit of a thorny issue,
Yeah.
especially alongside that emphasis on politeness. But Bushido recognized that true sincerity goes beyond just avoiding outright lies. It's about genuine interaction. It's about authenticity, even when it's hard.
So how do you handle those situations where honesty and politeness clash? Like, do you ever just kind of bite your tongue for the sake of keeping the peace?
It's a constant challenge. Bushido suggests that sometimes silence is actually more truthful than words, that a kind gesture can speak volumes. It's about finding that sweet spot where honesty doesn't cause harm or offense.
So it's about mindful communication,
Yeah,
understanding that even small gestures have an impact, and being willing to have those tough conversations with grace and compassion, even when disagreements arise.
absolutely.
Now, honor might seem kind of outdated,
Yeah,
like a relic of chivalry novels or something,
right.
but in the context of Bushido, it went beyond reputation or social standing. It was really about living up to your own internal code of ethics, doing what's right, even when no one is looking.
Exactly. It's about having the courage to act on your convictions even when it's unpopular or difficult. It's integrity in action, keeping your word, taking responsibility, living authentically. That takes real guts.
Yeah, and think about all those samurai stories we've talked about,
Yeah.
sacrificing themselves for their lord or the principles. I mean, we may not face those extremes, but we have choices every day between easy and right. And Bushido reminds us that true honor lies in choosing integrity, even if it comes at a cost. And what about loyalty? In our individualistic society, it might seem a little outdated. But Bushido reminds us that we're all interconnected, right? We have obligations to our family, our friends, our communities, and the causes we believe in.
Absolutely. True strength often lies in collaboration and cooperation, supporting each other, working towards shared goals. And sometimes loyalty means speaking truth to power,
Yeah.
challenging those we're loyal to when they go astray. That's real loyalty, not blind faith.
And Shigemori, torn between his father and his lord, sacrificing his own happiness for that greater good.
Right.
It really exemplifies that. It shows that loyalty can demand difficult choices,
Yeah.
speaking out against injustice, even at personal risk.
Right.
That takes a lot of courage. And finally, self-control.
Yeah.
In our world of instant gratification and constant stimulation, it's easy to forget about the importance of discipline, mastering our impulses, finding that inner peace. And Bushido really saw true strength, not in indulging every desire, but in choosing actions wisely with reason and clarity, not impulsivity.
Right. It's like those samurai who were trained to keep their cool in battle, facing death without flinching. We're not advocating, emotional suppression. But there's something to be said for that resilience, that ability to stay calm and focused when things get tough. I think we could all benefit from that.
Yeah, for sure.
It's about recognizing that emotions, while they're powerful, don't have to control us. It's about learning to step back, pause, breathe, and choose a more skillful response. And this is something that we can cultivate through practice, whether it's mindfulness or meditation or anything that helps us connect with that quiet center within.
Finding that balance between passion and reason, spontaneity and discipline. True freedom isn't about being ruled by our impulses, but about making conscious, intentional choices. That's empowering.
It is. And so while Bushido originated in a very different time, its core principles offer valuable insights for the 21st century. They remind us of the enduring power of integrity, courage, compassion, and self-mastery qualities that are as relevant today as they were centuries ago. And they provide a framework for navigating our complex modern lives, making choices that are both personally fulfilling and socially responsible.
So it's not about romanticizing the past.
Right.
It's about finding that unexpected wisdom,
Yeah.
taking inspiration from different cultures and traditions, and then adapting them to our own lives. There's a lot that we can learn from these ancient warriors.
Absolutely. Bushido is not a rigid set of rules. It's a source of inspiration. It's a framework for cultivating virtues that help us become more fully realized humans, both individually and collectively.
It's a fascinating journey of self-discovery. And it really makes you wonder how these values have shaped Japan as we know it today. Join us for part 3, where we'll explore the enduring influence of Bushido on modern Japanese culture.
So we've been exploring Bushido as this, personal code of conduct.
Right.
But I'm curious, how has it really shaped Japanese culture as a whole?
Right.
It's fascinating to think about these samurai values kind of echoing, through generations, even today.
Yeah, it is. And it's subtle, but it's pervasive.
Right.
It's like a cultural undercurrent.
Yeah.
Nitobe argues that it's often unconscious,
Okay.
deeply ingrained, like a hidden code.
I see.
You see it in the nuances of the language, the emphasis on respect and hierarchy, the value placed on discipline and self-control.
Uh-huh.
Even in art forms like calligraphy and flower arrangement.
Uh-huh.
Those aesthetic principles really reflect Bushido's influence.
So it's like cultural DNA in a way.
Yeah.
Like shaping how people interact, how they perceive the world.
Yeah. Can you give me some specific examples? What really struck you as a Bushido moment in modern Japan?
Well, one that always stands out for me is the concept of enryo.
Okay.
And it's often translated as restraint or reserve.
Uh-huh.
It's about being mindful of others,
Okay.
not imposing, avoiding discomfort or inconvenience.
I see.
It manifests in so many ways, like
Right.
apologizing profusely for even minor things, avoiding direct confrontation to maintain harmony.
It's so different from Western culture where we're, often encouraged to be assertive and outspoken.
It is.
But this enryu you're describing, it almost creates a shared responsibility for keeping things peaceful and respectful.
Yeah.
It's like a different kind of social contract.
It is, yeah.
And then there's gambear, right?
Oh, yes.
Which I guess roughly means persevere, do your best.
Right.
And that reflects this deep-seated work ethic,
Yeah.
this tenacity to overcome challenges and just strive for excellence.
It's everywhere.
Yeah.
From the corporate world to sports to the arts.
Just that never give up spirit.
Exactly.
Makes me think of those, incredible Japanese artisans
Yes.
honing their craft for years,
Yeah.
striving for that perfection.
It's not just about external achievement.
Right.
It's about that inner drive for self-improvement and mastery.
Now, obviously, some Bushido values like, the rigid hierarchy, obedience,
Right.
those clash with modern democratic ideals.
You do.
But we can still find insights
Right.
even there.
Right. Yeah.
Like, even the idea of loyalty wasn't just about blindly obeying a superior.
Right.
It was about understanding the importance of relationships, mutual respect, trust,
Yeah.
working towards a common goal.
Those are all essential in any modern organization or community.
Exactly. And even the emphasis on self-control,
Yes.
which can seem kind of strict from a modern perspective.
It can.
It actually offers a really valuable tool for navigating, our increasingly overwhelming world.
I agree.
It's about regulating those emotions, making choices based on reason and compassion,
Yeah.
and not impulsivity. It's about finding that calm amidst the storm,
Yeah.
that inner strength, that allows us to act with clarity and purpose,
Mm.
even when we're faced with these crazy challenges.
It
It's
is.
incredibly empowering.
It is. And, Bushido might not be like a perfect blueprint
Right?
for modern living, but it's such a rich source of insights. It's
Yeah.
a framework for understanding human motivation and behavior,
Uh,
a toolbox for cultivating virtues that help us lead more, meaningful and fulfilling lives.
it's about seeing beyond that romanticized samurai warrior
Right.
and recognizing that enduring wisdom that's really at the heart of this ancient code. I
Exactly.
mean, we can draw inspiration from all these different cultures, right?
Okay.
And find these universal truths that connect us all
Absolutely.
across time and
I
space.
think so.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Bushido,
Yeah.
I encourage you to keep exploring these ideas and see how they resonate with your own life.
I agree.
What aspects of this ancient warrior code really speak to you? How can you maybe integrate these insights into your own personal journey?
Yeah.
What new perspectives have you gained? We hope this deep dive has sparked your curiosity and inspired you to continue exploring and questioning and striving for a life of purpose and meaning.
Absolutely.